Good evening, you crazy ponies, and welcome to another installment of Mr. Kenyon's Pony Story Reading Fun Time. Now, there's not much backstory to this, we'll just kind of get right to it. The story here was suggested by Cooney of the TF2 Ponyville forums. A dark tale of destruction, sacrifice, and jelly. Lots and lots of jelly. Without further ado, I give you Posh's For I Am a Jelly God. Applejack trotted into the kitchen and frowned. Big Mac? Granny? Where is every pony? She knew that Apple Bloom had gone to the clubhouse to play with her friends, but Big Macintosh was supposed to be working in the barn. When she didn't find him there, she decided to check inside the house only to find it empty. No Big Mac, no Granny Smith occupying her favorite rocking chair, not even a trace of Winona. Something about this ain't right, Applejack said to herself. I wonder if Apple Bloom's okay. Thump. Applejack froze. What was that? She thought. She quieted her breathing, stood still, and listened. Thump. Thump. It was a wet, slapping sound. Something was striking against the door. Water balloon? Applejack asked. Must be some dang prank from Apple Bloom and her friends. Thump, thump, thump. The sound persisted and Applejack began to sweat. She swallowed, scowled, and marched to the door. The hay with it, she muttered. Ain't getting nowhere fretting like some candlelight snob. She took a deep breath and pulled the door open. A gelatinous red blob spilled into the house, trailing red slime behind it. Beneath its smooth surface, tiny white particles danced like dust motes in a sunbeam. It writhed, wriggled, and undulated on Applejack's doorstep before rolling slowly into the house. What the coyote? Said Applejack, backing away. Let me be, you crazy red loogie! The blob did not obey. It creeped steadily closer to her. I said get! Applejack snapped. She rolled around and bucked it hard with her powerful hind legs. They sank deep into the blob's body. She tried to wrench free but failed. The blob began to swallow her, pulling her inch by inch into itself. Get off of me! Cried Applejack. Help! Somebody help me! The blob drew her in up to her neck. She continued to struggle and call for help until all but her hat, which remained stuck to the blob's outer membrane, was swallowed. Applejack felt her senses dulling, her body shutting down. She feared that she was suffocating, but despite being unable to inhale, her lungs did not burn for air. Instinctively, she opened her mouth to scream and got a mouthful of red goo for her trouble. Her last sensation and thought before the world went dark was that the blob's body tasted oddly like cherries. Twilight Sparkle was hungry. As she rummaged through her cabinets and icebox for anything palatable, she thought about what she'd like to prepare for a meal, salivating all the while. What are you in the mood for? Spike asked from the kitchen table, where he sat gazing at a bowl of plump red rubies. A sandwich? The unicorn shook her head. Nah, that's really more of a lunch thing. I'm in the mood for something nutritious, but at the same time something that'll appeal to my sweet tooth a little more than not at all. You could just try some of my gemstones, said Spike. Twilight heard the sound of porcelain scraping against the wooden table. Spike was pushing the bowl in her direction. There's more than enough for the both of us. Twilight sighed, feigning exasperation. Spike, remember that time back in Canterlot when you talked me into eating that emerald? Hey, I didn't know any better. You should have. It's all your fault, really, said Spike. He reached into the bowl and retrieved a clump of rubies, then raised them to his mouth. Suddenly, he paused. Just remind me, you were only kidding about putting me into indentured service until I worked off the dental bill, right? Twilight chuckled as she pushed aside some condiment bottles. Hang in there, Spike. Only 50,000 more bits until you're... Aha! Her eyes caught sight of a wide glass jar labeled with a sticker of a red apple being struck by a bolt of lightning. Zap apple jam! I didn't know we had any left! She levitated it out of the fridge with a smile and unscrewed the lid, peeking into it. Her smile fell abruptly. Spike? Oh! Spike said through a mouthful of rubies. Twilight turned to and levitated the jar onto the table. She wordlessly pushed it towards Spike. He swallowed his rubies, peered into the jar, and then raised an eyebrow at Twilight. It's empty. So? I think we have a rule for throwing out jars when we finish them, said Twilight. And I wasn't the one who polished off this jam. Care to explain? She narrowed her eyes at her number one assistant. Spike looked away from Twilight, staring past her at the far wall. He drummed on his thighs, smacked his lips, kicked his feet, whistled, glanced around the room. Spike! Snapped Twilight. Spike jumped off his chair and walked around the table to stand in front of Twilight. You know what would make this all better, he asked? A big jar of Zap Apple Jam. What say we head on down to Sweet Apple Acres and see if they've still got a jar or two left? My treat. Twilight sighed, turned to the table, and slammed her face into it. Not the point I was trying to make, Spike, she said into the painted wooden surface. Nope, said Spike brightly. It's better! He took Twilight's tail in hand and walked toward the door, humming happily and dragging his friend behind him. Twilight slid across the floor of the library in a sitting position, an expression of true exasperation on her face. Scootaloo squinted out the window of the Cutie Mark Crusaders clubhouse. Hey, girls, she called over her shoulder. I think there's something out there. A wriggling, bulbous, blue-green blob, about the size and height of a full-grown pony, slithered along the path toward the clubhouse. Its gelatinous body undulated with every motion. Sweetie Belle presently joined her at the window. Apple Bloom was close behind. "Hey, yeah," said the unicorn filly, pointing out. "Check it out. I've never seen anything like that before." She shuddered. "So gross." "It's so mysterious," said Apple Bloom, a grin spreading across her face. She looked expectantly at Scootaloo. "It's so awesome!" Scootaloo whooped and pumped her hoof triumphantly. "Come on, let's go poke it and stuff." She leaped out the window, fluttering her tiny wings to slow her descent, and landed on the ground upon all fours. Her friends took the ramp. Together they trotted toward the blob. Scootaloo stood in front of it. Apple Bloom and Sweetie Belle took up positions at its sides. The three of them looked at one another, exchanging the same look of confusion. All the while, beneath their noses, the wriggling mass continued to creep ever closer to them. "What are we supposed to do with this thing again?" said Apple Bloom, tilting her head quizzically. Scootaloo rolled her eyes. "Duh, we figure out what it is, put it in a cage, cart it back to town, and get our cutie marks and weird creature identification." "Cutie mark crusaders, cryptozoologists?" said Sweetie Belle. "What would that even look like?" Apple Bloom and Scootaloo exchanged a sly grin, which they turned simultaneously upon Sweetie Belle. "I am not a dictionary," fumed Sweetie Belle. Her two friends giggled and exchanged a hoof slap. Sweetie Belle snorted and looked away. "I bet you wanted to poke at that thing, Scootaloo." "Huh?" Scootaloo perked up. "Oh, yeah. Cutie mark crusaders, cryptozoologists," Sweetie Belle deadpanned. "Cutie mark crusaders, that word!" cheered Scootaloo and Apple Bloom together. They turned back to the blob and found it much, much closer to them than it had been before. Finding nothing alarming about this development whatsoever, Scootaloo raised her hoof and tentatively extended it toward the blob. Apple Bloom watched with a growing grin on her face. Sweetie Belle turned up her nose at the two of them, shut her eyes, and harumphed. Scootaloo's hoof was centimeters away from the blob when a pseudopod suddenly caught it, enveloping her leg with terrifying speed. Scootaloo's expression changed from anticipation to panic. She struggled to free herself, but the blob's grip was too secure. "Help!" she cried. "I'm stuck!" Sweetie Belle apathetically opened an eye and rolled it to look at Scootaloo. She gasped at the sight of the blob attacking the filly, and instantly forgot her annoyance. "Scootaloo!" she said, her voice cracking. "We'll save you!" The blob had worked its way up to Scootaloo's shoulder and was now attempting to envelop her head entirely. Apple Bloom took hold of one of Scootaloo's hind legs, Sweetie Belle the other, and the two pulled. They grunted as their tiny muscles strained to dislodge their screaming friend, but with a strength belied by its appearance, it yanked Scootaloo free from her friend's grip, swallowing her whole. Apple Bloom and Sweetie Belle fell upon their backs, scrambled to their hooves, and scurried up the ramp into the clubhouse, screaming all the while. They slammed the door shut, piling furniture against it to stymie the blob. "The windows!" yelled Sweetie Belle. "It can still come in through the windows!" She flailed her limbs in the direction of the open window. Green-blue goo was oozing over the sill, dripping into the clubhouse. Apple Bloom gasped. "You shut that one! I'll get the one in the loft!" She sprinted to the ladder and bounded to the top, skipping rungs to climb faster as Sweetie Belle slammed the window shut on the incoming blob. Apple Bloom rushed to the loft window, slammed it down, and bolted it shut. Just as she did, a blob smacked against the glass with a disgusting squish. Apple Bloom squealed in surprise and fell backward onto her rump, staring wide-eyed at the blob. It wore Applejack's hat. "Are you good up there?" asked Sweetie Belle. Apple Bloom slid down the ladder and trotted to Sweetie Belle's side. "Yeah, all locked up nice and tight," she said in a quavering voice. She lay on the floor, curling up into a ball and pulling her legs closer to her chest, hugging herself as she trembled. "So, now, instead of getting swallowed like Scoot, we'll starve to death trying to wait them out. This is much better than getting it." Sweetie Belle took a deep breath and sighed loudly. Suddenly, something caught her eye. A thin trickle of red fluid was running down the wooden paneling of the walls. "Apple Bloom?" she said, struggling to keep her voice even. "I think the walls are bleeding." "What? Bleeding?" Apple Bloom scoffed. "Walls don't bleed, sweetie. You're just seeing things because you're too scared out of your wits to see straight no more." "No, Apple Bloom, the walls are bleeding." Sweetie Belle took Apple Bloom's head in her hooves and forced it around to look at where red fluid seeped through every crack and seam in the wall. It pooled on the clubhouse floor, then slowly began to spread across the room. Inch by inch, it grew in size, coating everything in a thick blanket of slime. The fillies screamed and turned to run, but the wall behind them oozed the same red slime. To their horror, every side of the clubhouse ran red with the goo, and encroached upon them rapidly, forming a tight circle around them. Apple Bloom and Sweetie Belle scurried to the center of the room and gripped one another tightly as the circle of dry floor around them grew smaller and smaller. "We're gonna die without ever getting our cutie mark, sweetie," wailed Apple Bloom. "I'm more upset about dying at all, really," said Sweetie Belle. "This isn't how I wanted it to happen." "How did you want to die then?" asked Apple Bloom. A thin strand of slime dripped onto her nose. She looked up, saw that the slime was now coming from the ceiling, and screamed. I don't know how I want to die! Sweetie Belle reached for a nearby stool and held it over her head. Apple Bloom crowded beneath it for cover. It isn't the kind of thing I ever thought I'd have to worry about! A sudden flash of white light forced the fillies to shield their eyes. Materializing behind them, her chin barely rising above the stool that they cowered beneath, was Twilight Sparkle. Girls, she said, are you aware the outside of the clubhouse is covered in... Ah! Yeah, those are pretty much our thoughts on the matter, said Sweetie Belle. Twilight! Apple Bloom wrapped herself around the unicorn's leg. Quick, teleport us out of here now! What? Both of you? Now? Panic shook every syllable of Twilight's voice. Teleporting myself is hard enough. Teleporting myself in 2 fillies is next to impossible. Please, Twilight, said Sweetie Belle as red goo cascaded down the sides of her stool umbrella. The circle was terrifyingly small now, and all 3 were pressed tightly together to avoid being gobbled. You have to try. It's already taken Scootaloo. Don't let it take us, too. With a horrible crumbling noise, the roof gave in and red goo poured into the room like a waterfall. The fillies screamed, but Twilight's horn flashed and a force field appeared over their heads. The goo pooled in its center, creating a frightening bulge that threatened to burst and spill its contents over them. Twilight grunted and sweated. The strain of maintaining the force field taxed every reserve of strength she had. A pseudopod lashed out of the growing puddle of goo and caught Sweetie Belle by the leg. In a heartbeat, it sucked her into the ankle-deep pool. A second pseudopod shot toward Apple Bloom, but Twilight wrapped the force field around the 2 of them in a tight sphere. The red goo that the field held at bay ran down its side like syrup over so many delectable pancakes. Through the translucent goo, they watched as the windows burst inward, sending shards of glass flying through the room, some sinking into the goo, some ricocheting against the barrier. Turquoise goo slithered over the sills and made its way toward the trapped ponies, mingling with the red and creating an off-putting shade of purple. Twilight wrapped her leg around Apple Bloom. The tip of her horn flashed, the energy sphere imploded, and together they vanished, abandoning the ruined clubhouse to its goopy fate. Oh my goodness, oh my goodness, oh my goodness! Panted Fluttershy as she sprinted through town. Rolling waves of purple goo chased her as she ran, rolling over obstacles, engulfing entire buildings, and swallowing whole ponies as it filled every street, gutter, and crevice in Ponyville. Angel clung to her mane, dangling in the breeze behind her like a streamer, whipping to and fro as Fluttershy turned her head in all directions in a vain search for safe harbor. His stomach was in a state of disarray, thanks to the turbulent ride that Fluttershy was giving him. Angel, sweetie, said Fluttershy. Panic upped the pitch of her voice considerably. She sounded not unlike Pinkie Pie with a lungful of helium. I don't suppose you see anywhere we could go, do you? Angel retched loudly and forced his breakfast back down. Oh dear, moaned Fluttershy. No luck at all? A tsunami of red goo twice her height barreled out of an alleyway and splashed in front of her, cutting off her escape. Fluttershy skidded to a halt and backed away instinctively before remembering that she'd been running away from goo the entire time, and that going backward would be counterintuitive to survival. Red goo creeped toward her from the front. Purple goo inched toward her from behind. What are we going to do? Whimpered Fluttershy. I'm so sorry, Angel Bunny. I just can't think of any way out of this. Angel grabbed hold of one of Fluttershy's wings and furiously flapped it. Fluttershy raised an eyebrow at him. Sweetie, what are you... Oh! She smiled. How embarrassing. Dear, why didn't you just say something? Angel retched a second time, filling his mouth with the contents of his stomach. He forced it down again, shuddering with disgust. Well, next time, please don't hesitate to speak up, said Fluttershy. She took wing just as the 2 creeping masses of goo collided, narrowly missing her. Now airborne and quickly gaining altitude, Fluttershy looked worriedly around the lake of goo that had once been Ponyville. This is awful, she said. Just awful. What is all of this stuff? Where did it come from? How did it cover the town so quickly? Isn't there any pony that it hasn't gotten yet? Fluttershy sighed. I shouldn't trouble you with my worries like that, Angel. You must be worried sick about our friends already. Angel leaned over Fluttershy's flank and retched, not bothering to hold back. I thought so, said Fluttershy with a nod. Her gaze ran over the goo-covered buildings and gunk-filled alleys, sizing up the rising tide. Alleyways and streets became creeks and rivers which fed into the wide, gel-filled basin that was once the center of town. Those precious few structures that were yet untouched by the mystery substance found themselves in grave danger as goo lapped at their walls. Globular balls of jelly slinked up their steps and threw themselves against the doors, battering them until they broke them down, met with the terrified shrieks of the building's occupants. One building in particular stood out to Fluttershy. Resembling the laboratory of a mad confectioner, which, in all reality it was, Sugar Cube Corner still remained like a rain-streaked rock in the middle of a tempest. On its front stoop, practically prancing with unrestrained glee, was Pinkie Pie. She looks oddly happy, all things considered, thought Fluttershy as she swooped in for a landing. Pinkie Pie, is everything all right? She asked. Is everything all right? Is everything all right? Pinkie Pie grinned eagerly at Fluttershy, then zipped to the open front door. Hey, every pony! Fluttershy's here and she's asking if everything's all right. Pinkie! Called Rarity's voice from inside. For Celestia's sake, please come back inside and help us board up these windows. Rarity's involving herself in manual labor? Thought Fluttershy. Oh dear, things must be worse than I thought. Pinkie bounced back to Fluttershy and pressed her face right up against the Pegasus. Everything's better than all right, Fluttershy. It's the end of the world, and it's bucking delicious! From a passing stream of turquoise gunk rose a blob that rolled gelatinously up the stairs. Fluttershy screamed and rushed for the door, but Pinkie bounced straight past her, humming happily to herself. Pinkie, stay away! Fluttershy cautioned. Pinkie either didn't hear her warning or didn't care. She bounced straight up to the blob and grinned. Fluttershy squeezed her eyes shut and held Angel against her chest. Don't look, sweetie, she squeaked. Angel released a growly sigh of exasperation. Fluttershy mistook it for terror. She braced herself for the dying screams of her friend, hating herself for her helplessness. All I know how to do is stare, she thought miserably. How do I do that against something that doesn't have eyes? She heard a slurping, sucking sound that dragged on and on for several seconds. Pinkie didn't scream or cry, and Fluttershy felt a surge of sympathy for her brave, brave friend, who didn't give her killer the satisfaction of begging for her life. She dared to open an eye, just a little, to gaze at the carnage, and snapped both of them open when she saw what had just happened. Pinkie Pie lay on her back, her hooves cupped over her full, pudgy belly. Blue-green goo was smeared all over her mouth and nose, and clung here and there to the foremost parts of her mane. She sighed contentedly. Now that hit the spot, she said, rolling her eyes to look at Fluttershy and smirking. Fluttershy tried to speak, but only managed to stammer and babble. Her communication failure lasted for several moments before Pinkie Pie appeared at her side, she never noticed the party pony move, and pulled her into a one-armed hug. Don't you get it, Fluttershy? She asked, gesturing broadly at the gelatinous carnage that filled Ponyville. This is the tastiest apocalypse I could have ever hoped for. But Pinkie! Fluttershy ducked out of her embrace, causing Pinkie Pie to drop forward with a startled whoa! The Pegasus looked at the porch where Pinkie had devoured the blob, gazing with macabre interest at the blue-stained spot left behind. Pinkie, aren't you in the teeniest bit scared of what's going on right now? Scared? Pinkie looked at Fluttershy confusedly and blinked, not comprehending. Then she laughed. Silly willy-nilly old filly, how can anything so lip-smackingly, tongue-swirlingly, belly-burstingly yummy be scary? And hey, even if it was scary, I wouldn't even need to laugh to make it disappear. I could just eat it up, which is even more fun if you ask me. Fluttershy looked harder at the spot where Pinkie had eaten the blob, and noticed several additional blue-tinted stains. There were others, too, that were faintly noticeable. Red and purple stains that blended so well into the magenta surfaces that no pony would have noticed unless they knew that they were there. Suddenly, she realized why Sugar Cube Corner was, as of yet, untouched. At that, there came a sudden crash, followed by a scream that was cut off abruptly. Fluttershy heard Mr. Cake cry out heartbreakingly, but he was quickly silenced. Fluttershy and Pinkie bounded into the building and were met with Rarity coming out of the kitchen carrying Pound Cake on her back. They broke through the barricades, got every pony except for this little one. Pound Cake screwed up his face and wailed, spraying tears all over Rarity's coat and mane. She grimaced at the unwanted shower, but endured. Is there any way out of here? Asked Fluttershy. I mean, I could fly away, but that would leave you two. Rarity opened her mouth to reply, but a wave of purple gushed through the door to the kitchen and rolled toward the gathered ponies. Ha ha ho! Crowed Pinkie, bounding forward. Looks like this nummy treat's number just came up. She flattened her back and bent her elbows, assuming an aggressive posture. There's a roof access upstairs. You get going. Rarity nodded briefly and bolted for the stairs. Fluttershy followed, but paused after a few steps and looked behind at Pinkie. What about you? I do what I do best. Pinkie's face split into a wide grin and she ran her tongue slowly over her lips. Stuff my face. Fluttershy blinked back tears. Pinkie, Angel tugged hard upon her wing, drawing her attention. Turquoise goo rolled into the room from the front door, edging slowly towards Fluttershy. She shut her eyes, turned her back on Pinkie, and sprinted after Rarity up the stairs. All right now, you deliciously multicolored heralds of the end times, Fluttershy heard Pinkie yell from downstairs. You just made the biggest, lastest mistake you'll ever make. Because the only thing scarier than the end of the world is a pink party pony with a rumbly in her tumbly.